we're going to start off this snowy winter landscape here by adding a sky. We're going to do a nice blue sky here. Now, on something like this, when you're doing a sky, if you wanted to do some variation in the sky, if you wanted to give it a little bit of depth or a little bit of extra color, you could do some blending in that. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes how to do that. But before we do any blending, we're just going to mix a color for our sky. And what I'm going to do is take my big brush out. So just take your big brush. And I'm using just a plate here to mix my paint. And I'm going to pick up two nice big scoops of white paint. And when I say big scoops, pretty big scoops here. So two nice big scoops of white paint. I'm going to put it right on my table, or on my plate here rather. So two nice big scoops of white paint. And then I'm going to dip my brush into my blue paint. You don't need to rinse your brush when you dip it into the blue paint. It's totally fine. You're going to mix some colors up. It's totally fine. But take a look. When I mix those two colors, the blue and the white, I am not trying to mix them completely together. Whenever you're doing something like a sky and you're planning to possibly do some blending to it later on anyway, it actually works really, really well if you don't blend the colors or don't mix the colors together completely. And that way you can still see a little bit of blue, still see a little bit of white. So you've got a head start on your blending, okay? Now, as you can see, mine is kind of roughly sketched here. I sketched mine in Sharpie. Yours, if you have a kit from Sips and Strokes, your kit most likely was sketched with a pencil. Now, there are a few that we sketched with a Sharpie. This is not one that we would have. I just sketch mine with a Sharpie when I'm doing these videos so that you can see them a little better, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix those two scoops of white, one scoop of blue together like we talked about. I'm gonna wipe my brush off a little bit because if it has too much paint on it, it's really hard to use, okay? So then I'm just gonna come in and start doing nice, long, soft paint strokes in my background here, in my sky area. Notice how really messy I'm being with them to begin with here, my little strokes. Don't worry about that. In a few minutes, we're gonna come back and we're gonna do some blending and we'll get rid of some of those stop and start marks. And when I say stop and start marks, I just mean literally every time your brush stroke stops or starts, you've got a little mark there, okay? Now you want to go all the way up to your pencil mark. You'll see I'm running into my Sharpie. These little lines that I've got on my trees here, these are not really important. Basically, all I needed to do was get an idea of where my trees were going to be. My trees are actually going to go out on top of my sky later. We'll also have some trees that overlap here, but my trees are going to go out a little further than these lines later on so that it looks a little more natural. Okay, we're not going to stay perfectly in these pencil marks or Sharpie marks. So you want to make sure you're covering those up as you go. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to get a nice little coat of blue on here. This is that blue and white mixture. And again, you notice how we've got those stop and start marks. If you come back in with your brush and just do nice, long, soft paint strokes like this, notice how it starts to get rid of some of those stop and start marks, okay? And again, just, you're ignoring these pencil marks or my Sharpie marks for right now. That doesn't really matter. Now, if I wanted to blend a little color into my sky, if I wanted to make it a little darker, I could pick up just a little bit of blue like this on my big brush and just come in and really, really softly kind of blend this in. Now, you don't have to do a whole lot of this to make a big difference. I'm going to add a little bit of white as well. Notice how I'm just kind of being messy here. People have a tendency to get really, really type A when they're doing something like this. Look, you want to make this kind of, just make it soft and just let it happen, okay? You don't need to worry about trying to get your strokes perfect or anything like that. I'm going to bring this a little closer so you can see my sky now. Notice how I've got a little bit of white blended in, a little bit of blue blended in. So I'm pretty happy with my sky. I'm just going to leave that, knowing that later on we're going to come back in, we're going to add a lot of snow to the sky so that we don't really need to worry a whole lot about the sky right now, okay? The next thing we're going to do, we're going to come in, and this is going to sound kind of weird. We're going to come in and add a little bit of blue to our snow. And this is our snow. We've got little snow mounds here and here and here. We're going to add a little bit of this blue and white color. The reason we're doing that is we don't want our snow just to be straight white. Whenever you're doing a painting, white is a very, very stark color. So you don't want to use too much white. So what we're going to do is just add a little bit of blue underneath where our snow is going to be, okay? So I'm going to pick up a little bit of this blue and white mixture I made. Notice I'm going kind of with the shape, just with the general shape of the slope of my snow. So I'm kind of going this way with this. Down here, I'll go this way and then this way. Notice also, I am not putting a lot of paint on here, okay? Not putting a lot of paint on there. Now, obviously, we don't want to cover up completely our snow. We do want to be able to see some of our white snow later on. This is just kind of a background layer, and this will show through later on so that you'll have a really, really nice little shadow kind of showing through on your snow, okay? So I'm just adding it kind of with the slope of my little snow mounds there. So I'm going to take my big brush now and I'm going to rinse it. So I'm going to take my big brush. So I'm going to rinse my big brush here. Rinse that off. And I'm going to dry it. Remember, anytime you take your brush out of the water, you want to make sure you're drying that off. I just keep an old towel handy. You could also use paper towels if you wanted, but I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to dry it off really well. Now, this blue has been allowed to dry for a couple of minutes here, but not too long. If we let it dry too long, it's not going to blend. And we do want to do a little bit of blending here. So what I'm going to do is pick up some white paint on my big brush again. And I'm going to come in just really soft. I'm going to go with the shape once again, with the shape of my little snow mounds here. I'm not trying to cover up this blue completely. I'm just going to make a little bit of a little textured look here. Now later on, I'll come back in and do some more stuff with this blue here. But for right now, I'm just coming in and adding a little bit of my white to the top of this blue mixture, just so that later on, like we just talked about, we've got just a little bit of just a hint of the blue color coming from underneath our white, okay? And that's just going to give us the illusion that we've got a little bit of reflection from our sky in our snow, okay? So notice I've got some nice blending here. Now, after that, we're going to come in and start on our trees, okay? When we start on these trees, I am going to start off with a mixture here of black and white. And I know that sounds odd, but what we want to do is make it look like our trees have a little bit of shading to those underneath them as well. So I'm going to take my medium brush. Now, the medium brush is the smaller of your two flat brushes. So again, that medium brush, the smaller of the two flat brushes. You have new brushes. Mine are kind of rough looking here, but you do have new brushes. Now, just so you know, and the white and black color we're going to use here, you could honestly also use blue and white on this. All we want is a little bit of a shadow or a little shading under this tree to make it look later on like it's a little more 3D, okay? But just for the purposes of this painting, I am going to do a little bit of gray underneath, okay? So I'm going to take my medium brush, and again, it's the smaller of the two flat brushes, and I'm going to pick up, 2 or 3 pumps of white paint. 2 or 3 pumps of white paint here, or 2 or 3 scoops, and 1 little scoop of black paint. Notice again, I'm not worried about trying to mix it completely together. And I'm going to wipe this off some because I don't want to have too much paint in there, okay? Now you can use your medium brush and your big brush as any flat brush. You can use it a couple of different ways. You can use it the full way like this, where you get a nice full stroke, or you can use it on the side like this and you get a little thinner stroke, okay? What we're going to do in this case is we're going to use the side of our brush we're going to start up at the top of our tree. We're going to start brushing down. Now, just think about, just imagine there is a line. You don't have to draw a line, but imagine there's a line down the center of your tree. Okay. That's that line or that imaginary line. And if you think it's going to help you, you can actually add a line in there. Just don't make it really, really thick. But that line, and again, it can be an imaginary line, is going to help us remember that we're going to go this way on this side of the line, that way on that side of the line, okay? And then once you get towards the line, kind of the center part, you'll just kind of flick your brush downwards. Now, when I say flick, that's what we're going to be doing with this whole little tree area here. You can start with the trees back here if you want. I'm going to start with this one just so you can kind of see what it looks like a little better. With these smaller trees, it's just a little harder for you to see what I'm doing. But I'm going to start on the side of my brush. I'm going to start right up here. And notice, I am just going to flick my brush like this and just go out to the side. It's a little slanted stroke. It's almost like a 45-degree angle stroke, but it is a little bit curved here. Now I'm going to go all the way down in this area right here. Notice though, I'm going out this way and going slanting out this way, going down with it. Doesn't matter. You don't need to cover completely all of your white canvas there. Right now, all we're worried about is just getting this first layer on. If you are left-handed, it's generally easier for you to start on the right-hand side. So I'm right-handed, so I started over here. If you're lefty, you might want to start over on this side. Just as a general rule, anything you're doing that's kind of symmetrical, you want to start with your non-dominant side, okay? So if you're right-handed like I am, we'd start on the left-hand side if you're doing something that's pretty symmetrical like this. If you're left-handed, you start on the right-hand side. So again, just think about you're going to start on the side opposite your dominant hand, okay? So I'm just going to keep going here like this. Notice how I'm just letting the strokes just come outside those lines a little bit. I'm going to bring this a little closer so you can see. Now you're starting to see some of those little bristles or some of those little branches from the tree, okay? So, and I'll come in here and just add some strokes that are a little bit straighter like this. Remember, it's totally fine that I'm not covering up my entire tree here. I can still see a little bit of white. That's actually perfect. That will help me later on. Being able to see a little bit of that white will help me later on to remember which way my strokes went. Notice I'm going all the way down into my snow here. That's totally fine. I'm actually going to have a little bit of snow, like a little snowbank in front of my tree later on. So for right now, I just want to make sure I get all the way down here. Okay. Now, this is a video. Obviously, you're not doing a live Zoom class. So this is a video, which is perfect because it's going to allow you to stop at any point you need to in order to catch up. Okay. So when we have a video like this, some people paint really, really fast and some people are more careful painters. So a video is actually a perfect option if you're painting with someone and you want to be able to pause it and chat, or if you want to be able to pause it to catch up, it's totally fine. We're going to do these other trees too. Like I said, if I were you, I would start with the smaller trees. When I'm teaching this class in person, or if I'm teaching a virtual Zoom class that's live, I want to make sure people start with those smaller trees just because they're a little more forgiving. Because if you come in and you start doing one of these trees and you realize, you know what, I'm not going out on this side and out on this side, I'm going the wrong way, then it's really easy if you just leave that tree alone. If you start with one of the back trees, move on to another one of these trees, just keep going. You can come back to that other one, okay? So if you start with one of the smaller trees, it's just a lot easier to come back in and redo it really quickly than it is if you start with the big tree here. But again, I wanted to start with the big tree for you guys so that you can see the way the strokes are going. It's just a little bigger, so it's a little easier to see, okay? Now, watch again as I come in. I'm going to start right up here. And again, I'm using the side of my medium brush, and I'm just going to brush like this. I am barely touching my canvas, which is really important when you're doing something like this. If I bear down on the canvas, it's not going to work as well. Notice my tree is going off the side of the canvas, but I'm just barely touching my canvas here, and I'm just flicking it down. Just flick, 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 okay? So I'm flicking this down, And again, just kind of barely touching my canvas here. It just helps us to get those nice little branches on the side. My tree's getting a little big. All right, and here. All right. In a minute, we're going to stop and add a little bit of white to these trees. Now, the reason we're doing that now is because we want the white to blend with the gray a little. Okay, so we want that white to blend with the gray a little. So I only want you to do a couple of trees before we start adding the white in, because if we let the gray completely dry, we're not going to be able to blend it. And again, what we're trying to do is just have our white paint blend with the gray just a little. We don't want the white paint to totally take over the gray. We still want to see some of that gray. We're actually going to do multiple coats on our trees. So we want to make sure that as we go, that we're blending a little bit. So with each successive layer, when you come in, you're still able to see some of the layer underneath, but you also see more of the layer adding, okay? And I know that's kind of confusing, but when we start doing this, you'll understand better. So I'm going to take my medium brush. I'm going to rinse it off. So I'm going to rinse this medium brush off here. And I'm going to dry it. And I'm going to start with my big tree because that's the one I started with earlier. And that one is the one that will dry first, as I started it earlier. Now, it is still a little bit wet. I'm going to hold it up here so you can see. I don't know if you can see, but it's still, yeah, you can see it's just a little bit wet still. So what I'm going to do is use just straight white paint. And I'm going to start right up at the top again. And just really softly come down like this. Notice now that I'm getting a little bit of texture on my tree. And I'm also getting a little bit of a lighter color, okay? So I'm getting a little texture, getting a little bit of a lighter color here. But again, I'm going really, really soft, just barely touching my canvas here with this brush, like you're petting a kitten, okay? Just really, really soft. Don't use a ton of white paint. In fact, a lot of times when people are in class, if I see they're kind of heavy-handed, I'll tell them after they put the paint on their brush to kind of dab it on their table a little bit so they don't have too much on there, okay? But if you barely touch your canvas, it just helps you to stop yourself if you realize you're using too much paint. Now notice I'm still seeing some of that gray underneath, which is perfect. And I'll come back in here, start adding some of my white that's a little straighter, kind of coming down the center like this. And notice how thick and chunky and big my strokes are there. But again, you're layering them and real soft like this. They are big, thick, chunky strokes. I'm trying to say that fast. But you are just layering them on like this, okay? And I'm going to bring this a little closer again so you can see it better. So you notice how I could still see a good bit of that gray underneath, which is perfect. Just to let you know, later on when we come back, we are going to be adding an extra color or an extra coat or maybe even two of white on top, just to give us our nice textured look and a little more of that 3D effect, okay? Now, the reason we're having to do the white on top of this gray before it dries is because in order for it to blend, you have to make sure that first coat is still wet. If you let that first coat wet, this is not going to blend, okay? You can fix anything with your painting, but just know if you ever start to try to blend something and it does not blend, the only thing in the world that can cause that is that your paint got dry. So if the color underneath it gets dry, just know that you are going to have to add a little more of the color underneath in order to make it blend. So I'm going to keep going on these trees. I'm going to do this tree right up here next because this tree is underneath this tree here. So I want to have it kind of overlap a little bit. My trees keep getting a little bigger, but that's totally fine. Whenever we sketch something like this out for you, we know you're going to go a little larger with it. So we usually sketch it a little smaller. It's hard not to go a little larger when you're doing something like this. And again, feel free. I don't expect you to keep up with me here. Just kind of showing you how to do this. What I suggest is that after I do a couple of trees, you stop the video, you do a couple of trees too, and then you come back in, do another couple of trees with me, and then stop and just take a look at it, kind of see where you're going, okay? But again, the gray mixture, which is just that black and white mixed together, that is going to be our base coat. And then while that's still wet, we're adding a little white to it, as you can see I'm doing here. And I've already done the white on these two trees. So the only trees I have left to add that white to are this tree here and this tree here. And remember, since this tree is in the back of this one, I'm going to do this one first. Remember, use that side of the medium brush so that it is a little bit smaller stroke. And I keep going too big here, so mine's going to go off the top of the canvas, which I'm fine with. If you're getting a little bit of this gray color into your cup of white paint, don't worry about that. Just so you know, we expect you to use a lot more paint than you would use if you were in an in-person class with us. People have a tendency on their own to use a little bit or maybe even a lot more paint. So believe it or not, you have got enough paint in those cups to paint this painting at least 3 times, okay? So we do that because we know that some people are going to go back in later on and start over on a section or whatever. There's nothing you can do to this canvas that can't be undone. So just know later on, if you do need to come back in and redo a section, you can easily do that. Just let the whatever section you're trying to redo, make sure that it dries before you come back in and try to add another coat, okay? If you keep going over and over and over a section, what's going to happen is you're going to start to literally pull paint off the canvas, okay? So we don't want to go over and over and over a section. We want to let things dry in between. And speaking of letting things dry, we're going to let this layer dry a little bit. We're going to let this dry, going to let our sky dry a little more. When we come back in a few minutes, we're going to add a little more depth and a little more texture to our snow. We'll also add another layer to our trees. We may even end up adding 2 layers to our trees. It just depends on how they look after this next layer we're going to do. We want to be able to see a lot of the white, but remember, we do want to see some of that gray poking through just so we have some depth and that kind of 3D effect we're looking for, okay? All right, so we're going to let this dry a little bit. Now's a good time to go rinse your brushes and get clean water. You want to do that every now and then just to make sure that you don't have so many different colors in your water. So do go rinse your brushes and get clean water at this point. And in just a few minutes, we'll resume and we'll come in and start working on this snowy area next. And by the way, if you haven't painted with me before, or if you haven't done a canvas class like this before, anything that goes to the edge of your canvas, take it around the side, okay? If you look at mine right now, look how it just stops there and you've got that white side. When you hang that up, it's not going to look right. So I want you to make sure anything that goes to the edge of your canvas when you're painting, you take it around the side. Now, you don't have to worry about it being the exact same color or anything like that. As long as you've got a pretty similar color on the side there, you're fine. So I'll pick up a little bit of this blue I had earlier. I'll add just a smidge of that on the sides here. Like I said, it doesn't have to be really perfect. Basically, we just want to make sure that those sides aren't really just straight white when we go to hang this up later on. We use these gallery wrapped canvases so that they're made just to hang up as soon as you're done. You don't have to frame them or anything. And I'll come back in, add a little more white in here, and I'll add some more white to that later on as well. But again, I just want to get a little bit of paint on that side of my canvas, and I can come touch that up later on. All right, so again, go rinse your brushes, get clean water. I know you're probably still working, which is perfect. Remember, the whole idea here is I want you to be able to stop the video Okay, we are going to come back in and start adding a little more texture to our snow here. Now, this is not the last thing we'll do to the snow. We're also going to come back in a little while and add a little extra snow to it as soon as we finish our trees. We are going to start off with the snow here. Now, you can use your big brush to do your snow. Don't worry if you run into the trees, and you will. Okay, you will run into those trees because we're using that big brush. So you are going to run into the trees. That's totally fine. We're going to come back in a few minutes and touch those up again anyway. So I want you to take out your big brush and your small brush, okay? So take out your big brush and your small brush. The small brush is the one that's a little bit pointier on the end like this. So take out your big brush and your small brush. Now, the reason you're taking out your small brush is this. Wherever you see a little sloping line like this or like this, and by the way, you'll still be able to see where those lines are, even with your pencil because you followed them earlier. Wherever you see something like that, we're going to add a teeny tiny little bit of black. Okay. Now, when I say a teeny tiny little bit of black, I mean a tiny bit. All right. So we're going to start right up in here in a minute and start adding some snow in here. When you get down to this little area, we want there to be a little bit of a shadow there. So we're going to add a tiny bit of black, and that is where the small brush comes in. Okay. The small brush is being used in this case. Now, the small brush is really only used for a few things. You use it for a little detail work, if you're outlining something, for instance. And you also use it, or I use it, to control how much paint I'm putting in. If I'm doing some mixing and I'm using, for instance, black or red, and I know that a little bit of those colors go a long way. So what I'm going to do is pick up with my big brush some white paint here. If you've got a ton of gray paint on top of that white in the cup, remember, you've got plenty of that paint. So just take a little paper towel or something and dip some of it, the gray off of it, off the top. So once again, I want to go with the shape of my slopes here. So this one kind of goes this way. Notice I'm doing kind of thick, chunky strokes of paint here. That is how I'm going to build my snow. Okay, so nice, thick, chunky strokes of white. I'm going to do, I'll tell you what, I'm going to have a little bit of snow that kind of comes this way here too. And then some that comes down here. Once again, I'm running into my tree. I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm going to pick up my small brush, put a little tiny bit of black paint right down here, just a little bit. See how little I put down there, okay? Just a tiny, tiny amount. And then I'll come back in with my big brush and I'll blend that in just a touch there. That's going to give me a little bit, I can add a little bit more actually. That's going to give me a little shadow right in here so that later on, I'll be able to tell where this mound of snow ends and this one begins, okay? So, and I can do the same thing on this other side here. I'll start right up here with my big brush. Nice, thick, chunky snow here heading down into my tree. And I'll take my small brush, just a little teeny tiny touch of black there. Pick up my big brush again, blend that in really softly. So now I got a little shadow in this area as well. Okay, so I got a couple shadows there. I mean, I might even put a little shadow in here. And then we'll do the one down at the bottom in just a second. Okay, so now is a good time for you to pause and get to this point with me in terms of your snow. And that way you've got a little extra texture down in the snow. Another thing you can do when you're trying to blend something like this black with the white is use your finger to blend it. And when we do the last coat in a few minutes on our snow, I'm going to show you how to do that. I love using my fingers when I'm painting. You can get a lot more control with your fingers when you're painting, and you can get some really, really cool texture when you're using your fingers and you're blending a color like this black in with your white. Okay, so like I said, now's a good time for you to pause and get to this point with me, and then in a second we'll do this little area down here, and then we'll come back in and start working on our trees. Now, obviously, our trees have a lot of gray in them right now. We will be adding another coat of white to those in a few minutes. So just know our trees are not going to stay gray like that. They look kind of dirty right now. We are going to have nice snowy trees here. But remember, we need to build some depth, and adding extra layers is a perfect way to do that. And I tell you what, I'm going to go ahead and do this little area down in here as well. And once again, nice, thick, chunky strokes. I'm going with the shape or with the slope here like this. And I can add a little black shadow right in here, just a little black here, a little bit of black there, a little black there. Don't overdo it. Just add a teeny tiny bit of that black, then blend. And by the way, if you do overdo it, I overdid it just a little bit right there. If you do overdo it a little bit, don't worry about it. Remember, we are going to do one more coat of white on top of our snow. All right, so now you just need to get to this point with me. You're going to probably need to pause right now and just catch up on your snow. Remember, on this snow, we want to be really, really kind of haphazard with it. I don't want you to come in and try to do anything really perfect. You don't need perfectly soft strokes. If you take a look at mine here, notice how mine is nice and chunky. There aren't any really, really perfect strokes going on there. Okay, so hopefully you paused until you were able to catch up with this snow. Look at this. See this gray down here? Don't worry about that. When we come back in later on, we're going to touch that up like we talked about. Remember at the very beginning, we talked about the fact we were going to have our snow drift kind of go in front of this tree a little bit. We'll do the same thing there. So just know we are going to come back in and do some more things with our snow. So don't worry if you've got a real heavy section of gray there like I do. My snow looks really, really dirty there, but it's totally fine. Okay. All right. So I am going to be using my medium brush once again. So I'm going to take that medium brush. Remember, that's just the smaller of the two flat brushes. And I'm going to start building my trees out. Since this may be my last layer on my trees, I'm going to go in the proper order here. I'm going to start with this tree here because it's in the very back. This tree overlaps a little bit, and this tree is actually going to overlap this one. So we're going to start in the back. We're going to build our way up front, okay? So I'm going to pick up a little white paint on my medium brush. And remember, we're using the side. And I'm going to start right up in here and just real soft. I'm in, start brushing out. Remember that imaginary line we have here. Brushing in this way, brushing kind of down the center once we get to the center. But notice now, I can still see some of my gray underneath, but not too much of it. So now I'm getting that nice white flocked tree look. I'll start right up in here, same deal. Remember, barely touch that canvas. It's just easier to control where your strokes go if you barely touch it. And also, if you barely touch it, notice how I'm going the opposite way here. That helps me to show that this tree here is overlapping the tree behind it, okay? And again, choppy little strokes here. They go out on the sides like this, and then they go more towards the center. Once you get here, it's kind of down like that. Don't cover all your gray up. I'm going to add a little gray in here because I think I went too heavy with my white. So I'm going to add a little more gray in here. You know, whenever I make a mistake like that, I try to leave that in the videos so I can show you how to do it too, because a lot of times when I make a mistake like that, other people do as well. So again, I just added a teeny tiny bit more gray in there. So the more layers you do, really, the more depth you get to it. So notice there, I've got a little more depth now to that tree. Now I can do this big tree in the center because this one is going to go on top of my other tree there. Now, if this tree overlaps the others a little bit, that's totally fine. That just means maybe yours got a little bigger. Don't worry about that. That's totally fine. Again, imaginary line in the center. And we're going to go out like this. on this side of that imaginary line, the other way on the other side of that imaginary line. And then once you get to the center, just kind of, brush down a little bit. I mean, you're still curving your strokes a little, but for the most part, you're kind of brushing down like this. You get barely touch your canvas. You hear how I'm doing this just really haphazardly. I'm not trying to come in and do really perfect strokes there. We want to make sure that we're doing this haphazardly. And when I finish that tree, I can come back in here. Remember, imaginary line down the center. I'm going to go out, out, and then down towards the center here. Okay. All right. So take your time on that. This is probably another good time to pause in order to be able to get to this point with me. We will come back in a minute and add a little more to our snow. I'm probably going to add a little more blue to my snow too, because if you've painted with me before, you've heard me say the word depth 6,000 times, because I love to get lots of depth on my paintings. So I'll probably come back in a minute and add a tiny bit more of that blue and maybe a little dot more of that black in a couple of places in order to give me some more depth. So remember, you can just pause the video at this point until you get to where I am, where I've got my trees done. I've got my snow done to this point. I am going to come back in and do some more stuff to my snow in a minute, but you want to get all those trees done, and then we'll start again. I just realized I went a little overboard with the white on this one too, so adding a little bit more of that gray in there. Got a big difference, just that little bit of gray made that nice phlox tree look again. All right, now for this next section, I'm going to be using my small brush and my medium brush. Now, the medium brush is the brush I'm going to be painting with. The small brush is for, you guessed it, giving myself a little break here from worrying about how much of the blue I'm adding in or how much of the black I'm adding in. I'm going to add those colors with this little brush so that I can control how much paint I'm putting in there. Let's start somewhere kind of forgiving here. So I'm going to start on this side right here. And that way, if you don't like how this is going, you can always come back in and redo that section. Think of this as a little practice section right here, okay? So I'm going to start off with my white here. I'm going to pick up some white. I'm going to come in, go with the shape or with the slope here like we talked about before. I'm going to add a teeny tiny little dot of that blue and white color we did before. And you can blend it with your fingers like this, or you could, with your brush like that, or you could blend with your fingers, okay? So I'm going to do the black with my finger. So I'll pick up a little black right here. If I blend with my fingers there, I can add a little bit of white right here. And I can take my fingers and just kind of do this real soft like this. Notice how when I do that, it doesn't look so perfect. I don't have those perfect straight lines that I get when I'm using my brush. You get a little more of a shadow there, and it looks a little less planned, okay? So, and I'm going to do that up here as well, and you could stop and do that, work on that section if you need to. I'll put a little bit of snow up in here too. Take my finger, kind of smoosh that in a little bit. All right, so I'm going to start right up in here. Notice I'm going pretty thick with this because I want it to look like I've got like a little snowdrift here in front of this tree some. You can still see a little bit of that bluish color coming from underneath, but I'm going to add just a little dot or two of that blue and white mixture from before. And like I said, I'm going to take my finger, just come in like this, little bit of reflection on my snow from my sky. Don't worry about the paint on your hands. The paint comes off your hands. People always kind of freak out about that. The paint will come off your hands though, okay? And I might add a tiny bit more blue over here just while I've got it on my brush or my finger. All right, so just real soft like this. And I'm going to hold this up so you can see a little better the texture I'm getting. So see this texture right over here, especially. I can pick up my white again with my medium brush over here. I'm going to go this way this time just so I can kind of build myself another little snowdrift there just because I really, really like those. And I'll add just a little bit of the black right in here. I can take my finger again and just go real soft like this. When you're using your finger especially, you want to go really, really soft. Just barely touch that canvas. Like I said, that's giving me that little textured look again. I might add a little more blue down in there as well. And this is that blue and white mixture we were using before. And remember, we're using that medium brush to add the white paint and then the small brush to add the blue and the black, just to control how much we're putting in there. All right, and pause this whenever you need to. I like to do a lot of blending in mine. Nice, thick, chunky white at this point. That's going to help it dry 3D too, which just adds to the authenticity of the snow. Notice I've got that snowdrift kind of going in front of this tree right here. So I'm really, really starting to build some texture here. Get a nice look with this blue I'm adding in, with the black or the gray I'm adding in. Remember, use your finger whenever you want. Keep in mind, if you put something in here and you don't like it, you can let it dry and then come back in a minute or two and go back over it again. I will tell you though, as you work here, I will tell you, you always, whenever you're looking at a painting, you always only see what you think you've done wrong. In fact, I always tell people, when you're looking at a painting while you're painting it, you see one of two things. You either see the thing you did most recently, so which in this case for us would be our snow. So when you look at your painting, if you stopped and looked at your painting right now, all you would see is that snow. Or you see anything that you think you might have done wrong. So I went back over my tree a little too heavy here with my snow. So I'm going to come back in a minute and add some more white onto my tree. But when I look at my painting, my eye is really drawn to that. All I see is that little section there that I think I messed up. So when you're looking at your painting, again, you see two things. You see either what you did last, which is our snow here, or you see what you think you might have messed up, which for me is this area right in here. A good way to look at your painting and really see it for what it's going to look like later on is to back up a little bit and squint. I know that sounds weird, but when you squint at your painting, you're not seeing little sections. You're seeing your painting as a full picture, okay? So when you squint, you back up and you squint just a little, you start to see what the painting as a whole looks like and not just these individual little fragments of your painting. Another good way to get an idea of what your painting really looks like or what it's going to look like later is to take a picture of it. If you just snap a quick picture with your phone, you can look at the picture and you'll get a better representation of what your painting is going to look like later. People are always doing that at the studio. They'll take a picture and they'll say, oh my gosh, this does look a lot better. Because again, when you are looking at a picture of it, you're seeing the painting as a whole. You're not seeing just individual pieces of it. And feel free to pause this now so you can catch up on your snow. Play around with that snow as much as you want. Keep in mind though, something I always say, if you ever think you're done, you were done 5 minutes ago. Okay. And all I mean by that is we all have a tendency to overdo. I am the worst person in the world for that. I am always, always overdoing. So try to resist the urge to go over and over and over a section. Every once in a while, just stop, take a breath, and even more important, let your painting take a breath so that you're not continually working that thing to death. Just stop, take a breather, and really think about what you're going to do next on your painting. Again, you can take a break now, or not take a break, but pause now so that you can work on your snow. When we come back in a minute, I'm going to add a little more white to this tree right now. I'm also going to show you what it would look like if you added a tiny bit of blue, that blue mixture to this tree in the center here. The reason to do that would be just to make this one pop a little more, just to kind of make this middle tree, it is the bigger tree, it is in the forefront. If you wanted to make it pop a little more, I'm going to show you how we could do that in just a few minutes. Okay, so go ahead and work on your snow. So if you want to pause now and work on that snow, in just a couple of minutes, we're going to get started on our this last little layer of snow I'm going to put on this tree. And like I said, I'm just doing that because this tree is the bigger tree. It's in the forefront here. I want to make that one pop a little more. So I'm going to add a little bit of that blue and white mixture from before and do the same general thing we did with the gray color and the white color. We're just going to add another layer or maybe even two on this tree. Okay, want to make sure it's pretty dry first, and I can already see mine is. But do go ahead and pause and make any little changes you need to make to your snow. Don't go over and over and over it though. If you need to, just let that dry a few minutes. You can always come back to the snow. If you keep going over and over and over it though, like I said, you're going to start pulling paint off your canvas. It's going to be really hard to work with. All right, so I'm going to add another layer to my tree in the center here. And like I said before your break, the reason I'm doing that is I really want that tree to stand out. Now, before we use the gray color underneath, I want to use a little bit of that blue and white now, but I don't want to have to come back in and do multiple coats with this white. So what I'm going to do is pick up with my small brush a little bit of that blue and white mixture, not much. And I'll come in, remember our imaginary line, I'll come in and maybe do a few little strokes here, not very many. So I'll do a few little strokes here with that blue and white color. Like I said, I'm using my small brush to add the blue and white color on. Now I need to blend it while it's still wet or it's not going to work. And I'm going to bring this a little closer here so you can kind of see how much blue and white mixture I've got on there. But I do have to go ahead and put my white on before that dries. So I'll come in like this. I'll add some white here. Notice how it's picking up some of that blue in just a few places there. I'm not trying to do a coat here that's going to cover up everything else. I still want to see the gray underneath some, still want to see a tiny bit of that blue and white mixture. But the whole idea is I do want this tree to kind of stand out a little more than those other trees in the back. So I did add a little bit of that white there. Now, sometimes when I do this, or add a little bit of that blue there, sometimes when I do this, people will decide, hey, I really like that blue and white. I like that blue and white look. I like the extra texture. I like the extra color it gives it. So if you wanted to do that to all four of these trees, you absolutely can. I just like to do it to this one because, again, I just like for this one to stand out a little more. So I just do it to this one here. You can absolutely do it to the others as well. It's just totally up to you. This is your painting, okay? And everybody's painting turns out a little different. If I paint this painting 10 times in one day, it's going to look a little different every time. Just know that going in, it's supposed to, okay? You're not going to paint this exactly like the person sitting next to you. You're not going to paint this exactly like me. All my instructors paint differently as well. I mean, we all end up with pretty much the same painting at the end, but there's a little bit of variation there because everybody has a little bit of a different painting style. It's just like your handwriting. Everybody's got a little bit of different painting style, just like you've got a different handwriting than the person next to you. And feel free to take a break now to work on these trees. And like I said, know that you can go back in and you can add that blue to every single one of those trees if you want to. I'm going to bring this a little closer here so you can see that blue a little better. That blue really does make that pop. But if you wanted to add a little blue to the other trees, just pause this video and add the blue to the other trees, okay? Don't ever worry about trying to do something exactly the way we do it. You want this painting to be like you want it to do. And the whole idea when you're doing a painting like this is you're putting a little bit of yourself into this. This is your interpretation of this painting. I'm going back in, add a little more white in a few places here, just where I feel like I need it. Do stand back though and squint, just kind of take a look at it and just see where you are with the painting. Sometimes you need to add a little extra something to it. Sometimes when you back up and squint, you have the opposite reaction. You say, hey, that looks good. I need to leave it alone. And again, if you think you need to leave it alone, you definitely do. So for our snow, there's a couple of different ways we could do the snow here. There's the really controlled way for snow, which is to use the handle of your brush. So not the bristles like this, but the handle like this. So you can use the handle of your brush if you want to do your snow. If you want to make your snow a little more controlled, you can use the handle of your brush. If you wanted to make it a little more abstract, you could do what we call splatter paint, okay? Splatter paint gets kind of messy, so you want to make sure if you're doing splatter paint that you're doing so in an area where you're not going to get splatter on the person next to you, you're not going to splatter on your furniture or anything like that. If you're wearing a watch or a ring or something on your non-dominant hand, if you're doing splatter, you may want to take that off. But this is the way that you can do a more controlled snowflake, okay? Use the handle of your brush, dip it in white paint, and then come in like this and just add little dots. Notice as my paint on the end of my brush starts running out, I end up with smaller dots or smaller snowflakes, okay? So as my paint starts running out, I end up with a lot less paint to make my snowflakes with, so they end up being smaller and a little more abstract. My favorite way to do my splatter paint, though, when I'm doing something like snow, is to use my my small brush, and I add a little bit of water to my paint, just enough to kind of make it milky is the best term I can think of for it here. So I want to make this paint a little bit milky. So I'm going to add a little water, not much, just a little water here to my white paint, just to a little section of your white paint. Don't do it to the whole cup. Okay, and then I've got a little bit of that paint and water mixture on the end here. You may have to try a few times to get a mixture that's thin enough for you to do this with. And the easiest way to do this, honestly, is to lay the painting flat on your table. I'm going to do it this way just so you can see a little better here, because I don't have the camera set up right now so that I could do it on the table for you. But if you take your small brush, you pick up a little bit of that water and white paint mixture, put a good bit of it on there. Hold your brush with your dominant hand. Hold your brush with your dominant hand. And again, ideally, you'll be able to lay this flat. So you're doing it this way. So hold your brush with your dominant hand. Hold your other hand like this and just kind of do a karate chop. Okay? Kind of a backwards karate chop here. I am going to lay this flat. Turn the camera down here a little bit. We're going to angle it down some, and I'm going to show you exactly how we're doing this. Okay, so I'm going to hold this brush with my dominant hand. Hold it really loosely. Don't hold it real, don't grip it really tightly like that. Just hold it really loosely like this. And then I'm just going to kind of karate chop like this, kind of a backwards karate chop. You'll notice I'm getting paint all over the place here, so I'm not going to do a ton of that. But with this, you get your snowflakes that are a lot more abstract. So if you wanted to do it that way, you could. Just kind of depends on what you want there, okay? I like the splatter paint option myself. So you hold it with your dominant hand, kind of karate chop this on here. And I want to get that snow all over the place here. And again, I'm getting it all over my drafting table here. So I'm not going to do a ton of it, but I do want you to see the difference the splatter paint makes, okay? Now, I would do a lot more snow on that. So if I were keeping this one, I would do a lot more snow on it. So I would just really go to town with that splatter paint in order to get some nice thick snow there, okay? And I'm going to bring this a little closer here just to show you what that splatter paint does. Notice how I've got some nice snow on top of my trees now, and that the snow is a little thicker there because I splattered it on. I didn't just dot it on. But again, you've got two different ways you can do your snow. It's totally up to you how you want to do the snow. Like I said, I prefer the splatter. Sometimes people, that kind of freaks them out. They want to do something a little neater, a little more uniform. So they do those perfect little white dots with the handle of their brush. Okay.